Long before Me Too exposed the depth of sexual misconduct from Hollywood to the halls of Congress, Chessy Prout helped shine a light on a sinister tradition at one of the country's most prestigious schools. It was 2014 when Prout, then a 15-year-old freshman at St. Paul's School, was approached by senior Owen Labrie to take part in Senior Salute, as it's called, a ritual where graduating boys hooked up with younger classmates. Though she met him willingly, they ended up in a secluded place where she says he raped her. Labrie was arrested, igniting a months-long legal battle and a national spotlight on an underground sex culture at one of the country's most elite boarding schools. And while the trial brought the senior ritual of sexual scoring in terms like slang to light, Prout's identity remained hidden from the public. In the end, Labrie was acquitted of rape but convicted of misdemeanor sexual assault and the felony of luring a minor with a computer, forcing him to register as a sex offender. He's currently asking the state for a new trial. As for Prout, she later went public to tell her story, teaming up with the Globe Spotlight reporter Jen Abelson, whose work has helped uncover other instances of sexual misconduct at the region's private schools. The book is called I Have the Right To, a high school survivor's story of sexual assault, justice, and hope. Chessy and Jen join me now. Good to see you both, and congratulations. There are many Chessy Prouts, but we don't know the vast majority of them. You chose to allow us to know you, Chessy. Why?
Well, I wasn't really given the luxury of staying anonymous for long. The defense attorney in my case used a tactic where he used my name as many times as he could during the trial, and so my name slipped through a lot of times instead of being blocked out. And so my name was written on the internet. Hate sites came up days after the trial, pictures of my home, my address, photos of my family. My younger sister, when she was 5 years old, was all over the internet. People writing rape threats, death threats, and so I felt as though I wanted to take back my name and my story from the hands of these trolls on the internet.
And you were 15 at the time, is that not correct?
At the time of my assault, I was 15, but at the time of my trial, I was 16 years old.
You know, Jen, for people sitting at home, shaking their heads saying how horrible this is, I don't want them to go home tonight or stay home tonight thinking this is aberrational. You wrote as a member of the Spotlight team about scores of these elite private schools in New England where at least a couple hundred kids had been the victims of sexual assault in, 67 schools or something. Is it fair to not call this an epidemic in New England?
Yes, what we found, we spent a year investigating sexual misconduct at private schools across New England, and ultimately it was more than 100 schools, more than 300 students we found had been victims. Many had suffered in silence for decades. There was widespread abuse of boys that was horrific of the Catholic Church, but also we found a lot of entitlement and sexism that led to the abuse of girls too.
And a lot of CYA on the parts of these schools. Is that not fair a statement also?
I mean, the schools covering up, pushing out predators, giving them recommendations to go to other schools.
You know, it's hard to say, Chessy, what's most disturbing in this book, but I have to say the thing that I found most painful was when you chose to return to school, I think as a sophomore, is the reaction you got from a lot of your classmates when you were the victim, you were the survivor. Can you describe briefly how you were treated by your classmates, by your fellow students?
Well, actually, in the weeks following my assault, I went on a community service trip with a group of strangers who, when I disclosed to them that I was a victim of sexual assault, supported me with open arms. And so when I returned back to St. Paul's School, because I didn't want my perpetrator to take anything else away from me, I expected the same response. But that was not what I was met with. I was pushed out because I stood up against their years and years-long traditions of the Senior Salute, and that I stood up to one of the most influential students on campus at the time. And apparently they weren't happy with that.
And in fact, some of the alum, did they not contribute financially so that the man accused of sexually assaulting you and ultimately convicted of it was able to afford an attorney? Is that not right?
Yes, that is right.
Can I ask you, one of the first statements that came out after your book came out from St. Paul's, I'll read in part, students understood Senior Salute to refer to a range of consensual behavior, they wrote. It was never a tradition, it was not about assault or coercion. The school has no tradition or culture that would ever allow or condone what happened to Chessy. What's your reaction to what St. Paul said?
I think we make it pretty obvious in the book. We even have a photo of the newspaper article that outlined what the Senior Salute was in the school's public paper.
The school's paper?
Yes.
Saying what?
saying that what the senior salute is and what it is. It's a tradition, and that teachers knew about it.
What's your reaction to what the school said? They have a statement subsequently, but one of their first statements, Jen, when your joint book came out.
I think one of the hardest things for Chessy, since this has come out, is that the school has still refused to acknowledge and accept what happened to her. Even comments that the president of Board of Trustees, Archibald Cox Jr., made in January of this year should have said whatever happened, whoever was to blame. And this was a crime that was committed. There was a verdict that happened, and it's really disappointing to see the kind of school response.
I should have asked you this before, but when I was asked Chessy about the reaction when she came back for her sophomore year, is that aberrational? I mean, it's not aberrational that the victim ends up becoming a victim yet again. Is that not true?
Absolutely. That's unfortunately the way our society has treated victims of sexual assault. People who speak out against these crimes, whether it's the victims themselves or even just bystanders or educators, we found in our investigation that often they were met with retaliation. Some people lost their jobs. Students were pushed out.
I want to get your reaction on one more thing. J.W. Carney, who represented Owen Labrie in court, was with me last week on a totally separate matter. But at the end, I read him some of the things you wrote about him. I read he was a manipulative bully, just like his client. Carney stopped the pummeling around 4 p.m. These are your words you wrote. You go on to say, how could this man get away with such revolting behavior? He was the type of person who makes it so hard for victims to come forward. Here's what Carney said.
She's entitled to her opinion, and I'll defend her right to express that opinion. I know that she was very unhappy with the outcome of that trial, where the jury came back and said, no, the government hasn't proven that you were forcibly raped. I think that Chessy and Owen were both so ill-served by the adults involved in this.
Carney then went on to reference emails, text messages, comments made in the days after the encounter indicated to him that there was some assumption of expectation of sexual activity in the days ahead. How do you react to what Carney said?
His views are archaic. If anybody had half a heart and brain to listen and really understand my pain and my trauma, then they would understand what had happened. And the judge clearly stated at the verdict that I did not consent to any activity. And that meant a lot to me, that the judge believed me.
What do you want teens in particular, people like you and you were, what do you want them to take away from this book?
Well, I wrote this book as sort of like a love letter to survivors. I didn't want to be vindictive. I wrote this book for the survivors. And so to kind of show that although we might go through some really terrible, hard things, that there is a community out there that's out there and ready to support you and love you, even when your family deserts you.
And what do you hope the schools that you investigated take away from this book?
I think this should be a lesson to them on how not to behave. That there's a new culture, a new era dawning, that the way that survivors need to be supported. I think a lot of what Chessy and I talk about is the need for consent education at a high school and even younger level, so students understand what consent is, what healthy relationships are, and schools really are a place where that needs to happen.
Thank you both. Chessy, congratulations
Thank you for having
your courage and a really important book. And Jen, congratulations to you too. Thank you both. Appreciate it. The book again is I Have the Right To, a high school survivor's story of sexual assault, justice, and hope. They'll be with Marjorie Egan and me tomorrow on Boston Public Radio.